Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome to Forums That Matter, a community service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland. I'm so happy that with all that's going on in Cleveland right now, you chose to spend your Sunday morning with us. I'm Jean Martin, the chairperson of the Forum Committee and the moderator of today's discussion, which has both remote and in-person audiences. I'm filling in for Ed Covington, a committee member who did all the legwork for the program, but had to leave town for a family funeral. We're thinking of you, Ed. Our topic today is on immigrants. Do they represent a burden, a blessing, or a duty? Our speakers will discuss this until about 9:30. Then we'll have a half an hour of Q&A. Jan and Ellen will circulate with mics for the in-person audience. Please raise your hand and wait for the mic to come to you so that the in-home audience can hear you. Also, when you get the mic, hold it close to your mouth so we can hear you. For the virtual audience, please use the Q&A box, not the chat box, for your questions. Also, a note to virtual viewers, you can turn closed captioning on or off at the bottom of the screen. Please be sure your phones are off or in airplane mode and keep your audio off. The program is recorded and it will be available in a few days on our website at uucleveland.org. I'm sorry that we had a little delayed start this morning. We are having, one of the speakers is having car issues. And so right now I will introduce both to you in hopes that our second speaker makes it here. James Nichols is staff attorney with Migration and Refugee Services at Cleveland Catholic Charities. He represents clients in deportation proceedings and numerous types of transactional applications with U.S. citizenship and immigration services, including green cards, naturalization, family petitions, and trafficking visas. He received his JD from Case Western Reserve University in 2019 and joined Catholic Charities in 2020. Dana Beveridge is an attorney of the Costas Network Law Center. She received her JD from Cleveland Marshall College of Law, where she served as executive editor of the Cleveland State Law Review and represented asylum applicants through the Appellate Law Clinic. She interned with the Irish Center for Human Rights and the Federal Public Defender's Office. Dana previously worked for several firms, specializing in immigration, criminal defense, and civil rights law. James, I turn this over to you.
Sure. The first thing is I can confirm that Dana works for Catholic Charities with us. And the next first thing that I would say is, Ed, I know you're listening. Thank you so much for helping coordinate this. I have worked pretty closely with Ed over the last several months, especially because he speaks Spanish and he's been translating. I've lost track of the number of documents that I've sent him to have translated. And not only does he do an amazing job with them, his turnaround rate is incredible. I have gotten translations back from him the same day, which is just, it's such a blessing, Ed, and the amount of work that you have contributed to helping us represent our clients, I struggle to communicate to you. So I want you guys to know that that is what Ed is doing with us. And if anybody else has any language skills, we need all the languages, including Spanish. So it would be great to just keep reaching out to people in the community that you know who speak other languages. You can send them to us. I'm going to have some good information for you to contact our office and a number of different ways that you can help our organization do the work that we do. I'm going to pull up. Okay. Great. Okay. Ed reached out to me probably 4 or 5 months ago asking to talk with you all about an immigration topic. And I said to Ed, we're going to have to narrow that a little bit. Immigration in general is a very hot topic. There's all sorts of things that we could talk about today. And so I asked him, what would you like us to talk about more specifically? And we have narrowed that topic a bit to the life of somebody who has fled their home country for some reason and come through the southern border and ends up in the Cleveland area. There's so much there. Okay, there's so much there, and Dana and I have done about as much as we possibly could to give you some insight of what it looks like for that person throughout the process until a decision for a certain type of application or just a decision about what happens to them in removal proceedings, whether they're deported, whether they're given some sort of a valid immigration status. So join me. This is a long walk and I only have a half hour. Okay. First, I'm going to tell you who we are and what we do at our office. How to make a referral is going to be in there. Then we're going to just walk the walk, crossing the southern border, what it might be like in detention, what it's like in immigration proceedings if you are, and what it's like to live undocumented in this country. And then we'll have some questions. We have a mission statement. This is what I'm doing as part of our mission statement. We provide and defend legal services to the most vulnerable people in our community. It is Northeast Ohio, so that you know. We actually reach as far as Youngstown, but there's another legal provider that takes over from like, what is that, Lorraine, all the way over to Toledo, okay? And another thing we do is reach out to the broader community and educate on evolving, keyword, immigration policies. What kinds of cases do we take? Green cards, citizenship, family reunification, both types. You could either be a green card holder or a citizen and be reunified with your family, or if you're a refugee. Asylum, we're going to talk a lot about that today. Removal defense, a lot about that today. There's other types of visas that you can get that lead to a green card, which we won't talk quite so much about, but SIJ stands for Special Immigrant Juvenile Status. SIV, Special Immigrant Visa, which is for those who served admirably alongside U.S. military in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're doing a lot of those, of course, with the number of Afghans that we've received over the last couple of years. And TPS stands for Temporary Protected Status. Briefly, there is a short list of countries that Congress has designated that you cannot be deported to. So Somalia, Venezuela. It's a short list of countries, but beyond not being deported to that country, there's relatively little benefit other than that. But we do encourage people to do it if they're eligible, because of course that's always a good thing, not to be deported to a war-torn country. And some other domestic visas. Okay, here's the referral information. people will call and just leave a voicemail with this basic information, and we promise we will call you back. Okay. Here we go. The route to the United States is notoriously the most dangerous migrant route in the world. I can tell you from the clients that I see, it is common for clients who are not coming from the triangle countries, triangle meaning Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Basically, if you're coming from Asia, from Africa, from Europe, lots of folks go through Brazil. Why Brazil? They give out visitor visas like candy. It is very easy to go to Brazil, but then that person is confronted with the question, do I stay in Brazil? Some people try to stay in Brazil, but many of them come with the goal of just getting onto this massive island that we call North and South America, and then make their way to the United States from there. How they do that is one of the most perilous journeys that you can make in the world. Lots of people walk it, lots of people take buses, and one of the ways routes is through what we call the Darien Gap, which goes through Panama and Costa Rica and Nicaragua, and you have to go through all sorts of other countries on the way here, and violence, robbery, abduction is a very common experience along the way. Just in 2022 alone, almost 700 people have died. And that's just of the people that we know about, I should say. Once migrants get to Mexico, there are deserts to cross. Once they get to the US border, there are more deserts to cross potentially. But these are of the people that survive, essentially, that reach the Mexican border that we're talking about so far. Who is it, as I was saying before, that reach the US-Mexico border? They're from all over the world. They really are. And one of the more interesting facts that we found when I was putting together this presentation was half, actually more than half, of people who are at the border are not from the triangle countries or Mexico. They're not from those countries where you hear this all the time in the news, and that it's easiest to come from those countries. But now, Venezuela, Peru, we receive all sorts of clients from Peru these days. Ecuador, if you're watching the news, is essentially in a civil war at this point. Haiti, of course. So think of your international crises, and they are coming here to the United States. And a point of reflection for me is we are understandably engrossed in the domestic conversation about how fraught our immigration policy is. Look at this list, though. The world still sees America as the place of refuge. So despite the fact that we have these very good conversations about how to take care of people from around the world and how we're not living up to that responsibility, people still see us as the place of refuge, which I think is really important to hold on to. Okay, the southern border, how is it? The crisis at the southern border, you could say, the genesis of the problems that we're seeing now was in 2006 when Congress passed the Secure Fence Act. And it was to address gaps in the wall, gaps in CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, ability to intercept migrants as they're coming to the United States. Of course, flash forward to 2017 when President Trump ordered DHS to construct much more of the wall. Not all of the southern border is a wall, of course. There are parts of it where it is simply too dangerous anyway, even without a wall to cross. The border itself had a floating barrier put in by the state of Texas, which is now in the throes of litigation between the federal government and Texas. Texas is also at the forefront of domestic immigration policy. It's a contradiction in terms because immigration is federal law. But we will see there's another slide called dealing with what's called SB4, which is State Bill 4 in Texas, which Texas would like to criminalize just being undocumented in the state. Arizona had a bill just like that not that long ago. And I'm referring actually to, well, it's a slide later on. The Supreme Court eventually decided that it is okay for police officers to inquire about your immigration status, but not to criminalize being undocumented. So that's pretty much where that ended up, and probably where the Texas law is going as well. But the point of this slide is that just crossing into the United States has been made much harder by the human element, aside from crossing the desert or the Rio Grande River.
You need it.
Dana has arrived.
Hi. Apologies for my my tardiness. Okay. Where's
I'll keep going while she's getting set up. Okay, so there's two ways to cross once you've arrived at the US-Mexico border. The preferred way, according to the government, is that you enter in a queue. That's nice. They have created something called the CBP1 app. How 21st century of them,
and
right?
it works fine and
And
no problem.
it worked perfectly. No, it doesn't. Within the first year of creating the app and taking appointment requests, they received almost 65 million requests. How many actual appointments did they have? Less than 500,000. Okay, and we had a asylum clinic yesterday where one of those clients told me that she waited in Mexico for her CBP1 appointment for, wait for it, 8 months along the Mexican border. She's not from Mexico. She has no idea how to survive there, and somehow she did. So the clients that we see, their journey to reach our office from the time that they left home can take years. And while they're on the US-Mexico border, on the Mexican side especially, it's incredibly dangerous. Another client of mine that I had a consultation with told me of sex trafficking rings where people were rounded up systematically by gangs that work in Mexico.
Yeah, I had a client who was detained and trafficked by a cartel for 6 months. So before she was able to make it over the border. Yeah.
Okay, so there are real advantages, though, of coming through on an appointment with CBP1.
Yeah, no.
It is a relatively organized thing where you have an appointment with a border patrol agent. You are given, if you request one, a credible fear interview of why you are afraid to go back to your country. They screen you for potential asylum relief. They don't help you apply necessarily. But they also let you in with parole, which allows you to get a work card. That's new these days. So those who stick it out and actually have a CBP1 interview are at a much better position than somebody who crosses illegally, may or may not be detected, may or may not be detained. So if you can survive and make it through, you should. So that's one of the ways that this is developed.
So there's the people that can wait that time and be patient, but for other people, that's not an option. Or they don't feel that it's an option. So there are still many migrants that are coming in like the traditional way, I guess you would say, through dangerous crossings in remote areas and undeveloped and unsafe, unauthorized crossing regions. And generally they're a group of people that are being guided there by a coyote or a human smuggler. Entering without inspection, or iwi as we call it for short, because it's extremely common. It is a violation of US immigration law that will get people put into detention and put into removal proceedings, which is the nice thing that we call deportation these days. If someone has already come through before and been sent back and now is coming through again, they can face felony charges. I think like you were talking about before, even if you do evade the Border Patrol, you don't have any interaction with immigration officials at the border. Once you're getting into America proper, getting settled someplace like Cleveland, you still have the uncertainties and difficulties of living as an undocumented person, including those anti-immigrant policies and legislations that Jamie was talking about before.
Let's say that you were apprehended and are detained, okay? There are approximately, I should say, more than 200 jails or detention centers across the country that you could be sent to. One of which here in Ohio is in Youngstown, for example. And it is a very interesting dynamic that it is a privately owned jail that the government has contracted with. Okay, so just keep that in mind. This is not a state-run institution that an immigration detainee is sent to. And note that that immigrant who crossed the border is now detained next to murderers, other criminals, and essentially treated the same way. You could be removed in an expedited fashion. This is for folks who have been removed before. They cross again, maybe they have new circumstances that they need to come to the United States for refuge. They are not heard by a judge. They are sent back either to Mexico, depending on which country they're from, or to their actual home country within 2 weeks of being apprehended. And they are held up at the border until that time. For everyone else, you could be held in detention for up to 2 months. It's getting closer to 2 months. That number has been increasing over the last few months, especially with the increasing number of people who are crossing. Your time there is horrific. It can be terrible. We have almost 1,000 documented instances, allegations of sexual assault by staff who run these detention centers. Nearly 200 people have died. It is not a humane way of processing people who are coming into the United States looking for refuge. It's just not. And I mean, when we're talking about immigration reform, we need to keep all of these things in mind, right? It's about judging people on the merits of their claim, yes, but also in terms of process, having more judges, having more defense attorneys, having better facilities to treat people in a humane way. This is all part of the process, and this walk that we're taking is just revealing a few of them.
Okay, so one thing that was very big news, at least for us in immigration law in the past year, was the asylum transit ban, which I don't remember what the actual name of the law is, but there's like a much prettier name for it. But that's what we've known it as. It went into effect in May 2023, but is currently stayed by a federal judge. But basically put a bunch of new prohibitions on people who would otherwise be eligible to apply for and receive asylum. So things like prohibiting people who had not gone through the CBP-1 appointment process, or people who had not, while on their way to the US, stopped in every other country, Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, and asked for asylum in those places. Very just unreasonable expectations for people.
It's still a question on the asylum application. Is
Yeah.
have you asked any other country along the way for a valid immigration status or for asylum?
And if not, explain why not.
Yeah.
So, we have people that are, English speakers from places in like Africa that are coming through Central America up to the United States and being asked, well, why didn't you ask in Mexico or Guatemala for asylum? Well, I don't speak Spanish. Why would I do that? I don't know anyone there. So, yeah. So then the next step during this processing phase, while you are in the custody of DHS, is getting that credible fear interview that we were talking about. So migrants must affirmatively express a fear of returning home and telling an official, I would like to apply for asylum. They might not actually be ever asked that by an officer. There's no point where you're being sat down necessarily and said, are you afraid to return home? So it is up to that person. It's their own burden to find that officer who is willing to listen and willing to schedule that appointment for them. They must show that there is at least 10% likelihood that they have a viable asylum claim during this interview in order to then be allowed to have their case processed through the immigration courts in whichever city they end up moving to, and having their claim heard in front of an immigration judge. The other thing that happens when you are in ICE detention is that you are issued a notice to appear, or an NTA. These days, they actually include the date of the person's first master calendar hearing, which is their first primary hearing in front of the judge. So it says time and date of when they need to show up for that court hearing. The judge doesn't always get a copy of that notice, so that person might not ever actually be on that judge's docket. They kind of just have to show up that day and see if they actually have a case open with the court, which can cause a lot of problems.
Lots.
Yeah.
The number of consultations that I've had where somebody has an NTA and I hold up this document, the most important document in their immigration life, which puts them in removal proceedings. Has anyone ever read this to you? I haven't had a single person say yes.
Yeah, the notice to appear has like all the allegations of what you are being charged with. So saying like you are not a citizen of the United States. I had a consultation this week for a family with a child who was born in the United States. Her NTA says you are not a citizen of the United States. No one read that to her. You know, it's got all these basic information and no one reads it.
You know, where's your hearing and when is it?
Yeah, no idea. Yeah.
No idea. Okay, what if you are not picked up? This is what I was talking about with
SB4.
the SB4, also known as the Show Me Your Papers law, which that's also the way that the Arizona bill was referred to. I covered this a little bit already, but police are in those states allowed to ask your immigration status if they pull you over, for example. But they are not allowed to detain you just for being undocumented. However, having stopped you and discovered that you are undocumented, they have ICE's phone number. So you can see where it goes from there.
They can always call and get you detained.
There's some other things about it. We're not going to spend too much time talking about this because it's kind of its own can of worms. But there's fines. They're talking about imposing criminal charges against public officials who enact welcoming policies towards migrants, providing some basic living amenities so that people can get by.
Okay, so immigration court proceedings. The purpose of these proceedings is to figure out if you do have a viable claim for asylum or any other form of relief. But it's usually asylum that we're talking about in these cases, which would allow the person to stay in the United States while they have the pending case. And then also, if it gets approved, to stay here permanently and become a green card holder. The first hearing that you have is a master calendar hearing. After that, people have an individual merits hearing, which is the actual like trial, where they are going up in front of the judge, hopefully with an attorney of their own, and going against a ICE attorney to argue whether or not they should be given asylum. A lot of people are confused about whether they, when they're coming in, if they have a master hearing coming up or if they have an ICE check-in coming up. Very important to know the difference because you're going to two different places, talking to two different people. Both are very important to not miss, or else you can be ordered removed.
Cleveland Immigration Court. Here's a quick rundown. There's 12 judges. There are over 50,000 active cases in that court, just Cleveland alone. This is a very interesting overview of which countries those folks are from, at least most of them. Top one being Venezuela. The asylum approval rate for our court is one of the lower in the country. It's between 10 and 20%. the overwhelming majority of those who are denied asylum are unrepresented.
I think it's 75% or so.
Right. So even if you have a lawyer, that improves your chances greatly. But this is for all cases, the 10 to 20 number there. There's an incredibly wide range of approvals versus denials depending on the judge you get. This is true. There's one judge in Houston that denies 95% of asylum claims. And then there's another judge in San Francisco that denies less than 1.5% of asylum claims. So, right, there's got to be some consistency. There's got to be some commonly accepted criteria,
Yeah.
standards by which to judge claims. Otherwise, there are legitimate criticisms on either side of this issue that one person who is very deserving of getting asylum is denied just because of the judge that they had. And then another person has a very weak basis that we in our office might even say, you probably shouldn't because this might be frivolous. They could win, just depending on the judge that they get. So that's another area of reform that we probably should talk about too.
So asylum applications are processed not just through the immigration court, like we talked about. Some people can also apply affirmatively with the asylum office. So if someone is coming into the United States and for some reason their notice to appear is not served with the court, so they're never put in removal proceedings, they can apply with the asylum office, which we prefer as a process. It's usually a much less intimidating process. You only have to go in one time to talk to someone, have one interview. You aren't like coming in for like these check-in preliminary hearings. But there are a million pending asylum cases with the asylum office. And the wait time to get an interview is likely to reach a decade very soon.
Okay, how do you defend yourself? There's a wide variety of ways that you can defend yourself. Asylum is one. But if you have been trafficked, there's a T visa. If you've been the victim of a crime, there's a U visa. If you are a minor with somebody who is here in the United States who is willing to take custody of you, and you are able to serve your parents if they're still alive in the home country that you're from, then you can have special immigrant juvenile status. You can get temporary protected status.
Based on your country of origin.
Based on your country of origin, where you're from, you might not be eligible. So you could also have somebody who files a family-based petition for you if that person has status. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can defend yourself, but you should probably get a lawyer. Okay, some last connecting information for you. There's our referral number at the top again. Anybody who wants to volunteer, here's the information for Ann Danula. We love having volunteers. If you have any donations, there's a website that you can go to, and our office is on West 78th Street. Feel free to stop by. Or ask Ed. Ed knows all about volunteering.
Yeah.
The last slide is not there. It's a Q&A slide.
Yeah,
Sure.
okay. All right, so any questions?
So I want to say, hold on. I want to say thank you very much for a very enlightening discussion, and we really appreciate all the work that you do. I also want to let the audience know that our congregation takes collection plates, and occasionally we take it in support of an organization. And last week, our collection plate was for the Migration and Refugee Services. So you can still donate if you weren't in church last week. You can donate through a Cash App, and the handle is $UUCC 44122. So now I'll turn the Q&A over to Ellen and Jan. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
One of the questions that came up had to do with the political interventions of the president. When President Obama was in office, he tried to make ways that would improve a country's economic status. So Venezuela and Mexico received support for economic development to discourage people from leaving their native countries to come to America. That seems to have gone by the wayside in France. Is there any way that we can make life better for people in other countries so that there isn't this overwhelming crisis at the border?
That's a fantastic international development question that I am not prepared to answer. I think it is a worthwhile conversation, though, about our engagement with the rest of the world. A brief, very brief historical point that I would make is that we don't exactly have the best track record of intervening in Central America. So I'll leave that one there. Yes, sir.
So I'm wondering, you're asking for volunteers.
That's to be the money.
Oh, okay, usually I don't have that problem. So you're asking for volunteers, which is great. And hopefully you'll get a lot today. What type of assistance would be valuable for you? For example, let's say there are people here who have a legal background, but not in this field, which is often the case. What would you be looking for?
Sure. Okay. From the legal angle, there's two ways. One is assistance with our office in filling out forms. We have a couple, I would call them full-time volunteers who are attorneys.
We have a current patent attorney who's lovely and fills out forms wonderfully. You can do it too.
Yeah, most of the transactional work in immigration is easy. It's not that intimidating, but it requires attention to detail, organization, communication with the client about answering all the various questions that are throughout the form, and putting together the necessary evidence for that application to be approved, all of which gets reviewed by staff attorneys. So it's very low, I think low stress.
Yeah.
But it's good busy work. Another way, if you're an attorney, is to take pro bono cases. You do not have to be an immigration attorney to take a pro bono case. We have a pro bono coordinator who is located physically in Columbus. Not that that matters necessarily these days, but she's there to guide attorneys through the process of representing somebody in removal. So there's another way. Non-legal opportunities include working with our case managers on the social work side, helping folks find apartments, helping furnish those apartments, picking up people from the airport. There's all manner of ways, and Anne has much more information about that side than I ever would.
Yeah. There's also translation, like what Ed does.
Right.
And if anyone is polyglot or bilingual, yeah, translation and interpretation would be very helpful as well.
Thank you.
I was asked to turn off the PowerPoint. Hopefully they have us now online.
I was just curious, this is on, but
I think it is.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons people come here. I heard Guatemala had 3 major earthquakes. Do they keep statistics on people fleeing because of climate change problem? Or, also, political?
I mean, there's absolutely like like NGOs and nonprofits throughout the world that do that kind of work and advocate for situations of climate-based refugee and migration. Off the top of my
I
head,
think there's a UN agency
yeah,
that tracks not just migration to the United States, but migration around the world related to climate change specifically. Famines in Africa and tsunamis in Asia and how people move away from those areas. But I can't off the top of my head think of what they're called. There's a lot of data on that though.
We have a question from, this is from one of our virtual attendees. Is there a rational and humane way to regulate the flow of people from a dangerous world to a safe and prosperous place like the United States?
that's not an easy question to solve, I guess. Do you want to
It
solve
requires, yeah, I mean,
immigration right now?
I'll solve anthropology
Yeah,
as well. It requires a lot of resources. It requires the coming together of the international community. It requires funding of UN agencies.
willingness of multiple levels of government to cooperate and to be kind of on the same page of a certain goal, which is not what we have right now.
How easy or difficult is it for you to find housing or jobs for people to live with?
So that is that's managed by the other side of our office, the Migration Refugee Services. We are kind of a subset of that where we just deal with the legal services. But we do have caseworkers that help folks find employment. We have multiple companies here in the Cleveland area that we've worked with to place people. We have training for, particularly for refugees coming into the United States, training of certain job skills and how to make a resume, how to go to a job interview successfully. So I can't speak for them of like how difficult it is, but we do have services to assist newcomers to the country.
There's a big difference though between what services we can provide to somebody who has immigration status versus somebody who does not.
Yes, absolutely. So someone who's coming into the country without employment authorization makes it very hard for them to obviously get a job, but also without employment authorization, you can't get a driver's license. You don't have a social security card. You probably are not going to be picked for an apartment because they can't do a background check on you. They don't have a social number. So there are a lot of barriers in the way for someone who is living without legal status in the United States.
The vulnerability in that situation is acute.
Yes.
If you are looking for a place to stay, what would you do just to find a place where you can have a roof over your head? And some of the consultations that we've had have been severe trafficking, extremely vulnerable situations.
Yeah, labor exploitation, trafficking situations where, the person is living in someone's home and being taken advantage of.
I could tell. Just to give you a realistic sense, one of my consultations was a very young mother who was promised to be taken care of in a wide variety of ways. If she was a surrogate for this person's baby, and then when it didn't work out, she tried to buy this young mother's baby instead. See, it's horrific. And that person, I think, deserves a T visa.
Yeah.
But we needed some certification from the police that they were cooperative with the investigation, and they refused to certify. So, I mean, these are the kinds of issues that we run into a lot. And I think we need help.
We hear about the extreme circumstances to claim asylum. Are there any just sort of basic, I mean, do you have to be, you know, in a horrendous situation to qualify for asylum? Is there no just a better life, a roof over your head?
No, I mean, honestly, these days, the easiest asylum cases I've seen are being someone who fled Afghanistan when the US fell. So that is, yeah, a preferred population who got expedited processing through, just because there were so many people who came in all at the same time in August, September, October 2021. Those are still people who are waiting for asylum decisions, though. So in that case, you could have just been, you know, finding your time, have a good life in Afghanistan, and then this terrible thing happened and you had to flee. That's still a traumatic event, I think, though. But honestly, I think that's kind of the best circumstance for someone who gets granted asylum.
I've noticed that a lot of the time, asylum grants are based on what is the hot topic politically right now. When I was in law school, I was in the immigration clinic, and Venezuela had just had this massive crisis. And we had one client who had applied for asylum who happened to be from Venezuela, and theirs was granted in 2 weeks.
There you go.
The same thing essentially is happening for folks from Afghanistan. But just as a quick rundown of what asylum is, so that you have an idea legally of what somebody has to prove to claim asylum, you are forced to flee from your country by threats or direct violence to you that you can prove. And that violence or threats were made against you by somebody that the government could not stop, or it was the government themselves, because of your identity in one of what we call 5 protected categories. And you have to qualify for one of those 5 protected categories: your nationality, your race, your religion, your political opinion, or your membership to a particular social group, which is one that we lawyers really like, right? And that there was nowhere else in the country that you could reasonably locate to, that you never went back to that country after. There's all of these requirements. And it is still crazy to me that we have a system where somebody who doesn't speak English, maybe doesn't have a high school education, is somehow expected to walk this path to winning asylum. It's incredible. It really is.
So, as part of your title for your speech, I'd like to hear you talk about the blessing of immigrants.
There are many. Where does one start?
I mean, I think just having a community of very diverse people with so many different backgrounds and faith and experiences is such a wonderful way to live your life, to not be like, you know, in a bubble of people that are just like you. I feel very blessed to have met and spoken with people from so many walks of life. And, you know, these are people also like talking about their like most intimate, terrible, traumatic experiences. So you feel very close to these people sometimes as clients.
Absolutely. I mean, you learn about yourself.
Yeah.
By talking with people who are different from you. And there's all sorts of things that you can learn about the world, about your own belief system.
About things that we're taught here as Americans.
Absolutely.
And how that's either pervasive or different in other countries and cultures.
We have time for one more question.
All right, here we go.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to take that last point, the blessing part. I think America is, after all, a country that has been created by immigrants, all of us. I'm a direct immigrant. I mean, I stepped off the boat in New York some 60 years ago. If you were to ask for a raise of hands of people who either directly or through direct parents came from another country here, might be interesting to see how deep that trend of immigration, even on a relatively recent last 50, 60 years, then basically goes. The need for people in this country to further develop, and America, America, basically, the United States, is not at all densely populated as compared to many of the other countries. And for its further development, we definitely need more people here for services, etc. I have business contacts, and I ask them their needs, etc., and how their needs are basically satisfied by home thing. And what they say, well, fortunately, we have the Mexicans, and have another guy that is a big farmer. If he makes it a day off from his farm, how did you manage? Well, we have the Mexicans. So my point is in elaborating beyond the contents of your address is that there is a tremendous benefit and there is a need for significant ongoing immigration. Thank you.
Yeah, I do think it's true that like just the economy really does benefit from immigrant workers, even though they do make up a small part of the employed people, like formally employed people in the country. But there's also something to be said of like not just relying on immigrants to have those like low paying jobs and for them to have to expect to, you know, make cash under the table or to work in substandard working conditions. So
I found most folks want to be on the radar. They do. They want to be on the radar. Because if you're on the radar, you can't be taken advantage of nearly as easily. You can receive public housing. You can contribute to that public housing through your taxes. There's also some other part of what you're saying in terms of white collar jobs, where I know that there were several doctors at the Cleveland Clinic who happened to have come from countries that were part of the Muslim ban. who couldn't come back to the Cleveland Clinic to practice. Because, you know, so these are the kinds of things that we need to think about when we are lobbying our elected representatives and voting. There are very good reasons to have more generous, open immigration policies than there are for shutting it down.
I think we need to end
Yeah.
there. Thank you, everybody, speakers, tech people, mic handlers, and audience for a great program this morning. In 2 weeks, on April 21st, we'll feature a personal look at living with dementia. Alexandra Britt from the Alzheimer's Association Cleveland chapter will join us in conversation with a patient who has dementia and her care partner. And on May 5th, we'll close out the season with a forum on the rise of right-wing organizations. If you'd like to receive our weekly reminders of forums, we have a clipboard here that we can circulate for you to fill out. You're welcome to attend our 10:15 a.m. service, either upstairs in the sanctuary or on our YouTube page. The theme today is interdependence. We'll be treated to the music of Karin Tooley and also our chancel choir. To see what else is happening in our congregation, check out our website at uucleveland.org. Thanks again for joining us. Enjoy basketball, the film festival, the eclipse, the Guardians opening day, and whatever else is going on in CLE.
What a time.
Like to mention the CBA.
We are right